No school, no homework, no angry teacher confiscating your spear during class. For over 300,000 years, if a caveman kid misbehaved, nobody sent home a note. They just got left slightly further from the fire. That was the whole discipline system. Cold equals consequences. And somehow, without a single classroom, textbook, pop quiz, or see me after class, these kids grew up knowing how to hunt, track, start a fire, avoid the plants that kill you, and not get eaten by literally anything. Meanwhile, some of us needed 4 years of college and still asked the GPS to repeat itself. So, no, ancient children weren't falling behind. If anything, they were out here passing Advanced Not Dying 101 before they lost their baby teeth. So, how did it actually work? How do you raise a child to survive a world with zero margin for error, with no lesson plan, no PTA meetings, and no participation trophies? That's what we're getting into today. Before we talk about how ancient children learned, we have to throw out the picture in our heads of what learning looks like. There was no separation between child time and adult time. A child in a hunter-gatherer band spent nearly every waking hour inside the actual, real work of the tribe. Not observing it from a distance, inside it, strapped to a mother's back while she dug roots, sitting by the fire while a grandfather reshaped a spear point, following an older sibling to check snares before sunrise. This is the first thing to understand. The camp itself was the school. There was no walk to a separate building, no bell that split living from learning. The two were the same activity. Anthropologists studying groups like the Hadza in Tanzania or the Juhwansi of the Kalahari, some of the last populations to live largely as foraging societies into the modern era, noticed something striking. Children as young as 2 or 3 were already present at almost every task the adults performed, not doing it, watching it, close enough to smell the smoke, feel the tools, hear the words. And this mattered more than it sounds like it should. A child watching real work, done for real reasons with real consequences, learns differently than a child being told about work in the abstract. The knife is actually sharp. The fire actually burns. The story is actually about someone's uncle. Nothing is hypothetical. If there was a curriculum at all, it was built entirely on one method. Watch, then try. This sounds almost too simple, but it's worth taking seriously because modern research on child learning keeps circling back to how powerful pure observation actually is. Human children, more than almost any other species, are wired to imitate. Not just copy the outcome, but copy the exact method, down to small, seemingly unnecessary steps. Psychologists call this over-imitation, and it shows up almost universally in young children. In an ancient camp, this instinct wasn't a quirk. It was the entire transmission system for survival knowledge. A child would watch a parent strip bark from a branch a certain way, not because there was only one way to do it, but because copying the exact motion, mistakes and all, built the deep muscle memory needed to do it correctly later, without thinking. Toolmaking, fire starting, tracking an animal's print, judging which plants were safe, all of it moved from adult hands to child hands, one repeated observation at a time. And critically, no one stopped to explain it in words first. The explanation came after the doing, if it came at all. "Why did you cut it that way?" might get an answer, but the learning had already started the moment the child watched. Here's something that might surprise you. A huge amount of what looked like play among ancient children was, functionally, training. Basically, recess was secretly a job interview. Children play hunted with tiny spears made just for them. Miniature murder weapons technically, but adorable. They play-built tiny shelters. They mock-fought with sticks, threw rocks at targets, and chased bugs and small animals for the thrill of catching something, which, let's be honest, is also what half of us do at age 30, just with a phone camera instead of a stick. To an outside observer, it looks like nothing more than kids having fun. But look closer, and the pattern is unmistakable. Almost every game rehearses a skill the child will need as an adult. Nobody was handing out participation trophies here. The prize for winning tag was, eventually, not starving. Throwing games build the exact hand-eye coordination needed for hunting with a spear or a bow later. Chasing games build endurance and the instinct to track a moving target. Building tiny shelters teaches structural intuition long before a child could build a real one. Even arguments and squabbles among children, negotiating who goes first, who gets what, quietly rehearse the social skills needed to survive inside a small, interdependent group for life. This is sometimes called practice play, and it's one of the most efficient teaching tools ever discovered, except no one designed it. It emerged naturally because children playing freely will almost always gravitate toward rehearsing the skills of the adults around them. Nobody had to force it. The children built their own curriculum just by copying what mattered. Ancient humans didn't have written records. What they had instead was something arguably better suited to a child's mind. Around the fire at night, when the day's work was done, elders told stories. Not just entertainment, encoded knowledge. A story about a hunter who ignored the warning signs of a coming storm and was caught in it. A story about a girl who wandered too far from camp and had to find her way back using the stars. A story about which berries looked safe, but weren't. These weren't lectures. They were narratives, full of characters and danger and resolution. And that mattered enormously. The human brain is built to remember stories far more easily than it remembers lists of facts. A child who heard "don't eat the red berries near the river" once might forget it. A child who heard a vivid, dramatic story about someone who did eat those berries and what happened next would remember it for the rest of their life. Stories also let children rehearse danger without facing it. They could learn the consequence of a bad decision, a wrong turn, an ignored warning, without ever having to make that mistake themselves. In a world where a single serious error could be fatal, this was an extraordinarily efficient way to transmit hard-won lessons across generations, at almost no cost. And because these stories were told over and over, slightly differently each time, by different elders, a child absorbed not just one version of the world's dangers, but many, layered on top of each other, until the knowledge felt like instinct. In modern life, we tend to think of teaching as a specialized job, something one trained person does for a classroom of children. Ancient life didn't work that way at all. Every adult in the camp was, in some sense, a teacher. A child wasn't only raised by their parents, they were raised by the whole band. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, unrelated adults, older cousins, even older children. Anthropologists call this alloparenting. Parenting shared across a wide network, not concentrated in just two people. This mattered for learning in a very practical way. A child had access to many different skill sets, personalities, and areas of expertise, not just whatever their own parents happened to know. One elder might be the best tracker in the group. Another might know every edible plant for 100 miles. Another might be the best storyteller, or the one who understood which animals were dangerous and which were harmless. A child growing up inside this kind of network wasn't limited by their parents' knowledge. They had, in effect, dozens of specialized teachers, each one demonstrating their own expertise naturally in the course of daily life. There was no need to enroll in a class to learn tracking versus plant knowledge versus tool making. The whole camp was already structured to expose a child to all of it, gradually, at their own pace. And there was another benefit here that's easy to miss: emotional security. A child who had many trusted adults around them, not just two, had a much wider safety net. If a parent was away hunting or sick or simply busy, there was always someone else close by who cared for that child's well-being. Ancient childhood was, in this sense, remarkably well supported, just not in the way we're used to picturing it. As children grew older, watching turned into doing, and the responsibility became real, not simulated. A child of 7 or 8 might already be trusted with genuinely useful tasks: gathering firewood, watching younger siblings, helping carry water, checking simple traps set close to camp. These weren't chores invented to keep children busy. They were real contributions the camp depended on. By adolescence, in many hunter-gatherer societies, a young person might already be a capable hunter or gatherer in their own right. Not because they'd finished some formal training program, but because they'd spent a decade steadily doing more and more of the real work under the loose supervision of adults who trusted them a little further each year. This is a strikingly different model from modern schooling, where competence is often withheld from real-world testing until adulthood. In ancient life, the stakes rose gradually and constantly. A child wasn't protected from responsibility, they were slowly handed more of it, in proportion to what they'd already shown they could do. Mistakes happened, of course. And they mattered. But they mattered in a way that taught fast. A poorly made tool broke, a misjudged plant made someone sick. A missed animal track meant an empty snare. The feedback was immediate, direct, and impossible to ignore, which is, in many ways, a far more powerful teacher than any test score ever could be. It would be easy to look at all this and assume ancient children learned less than children today, simply because there was no formal system, but the research doesn't support that at all. Studies of surviving hunter-gatherer societies show that children in these groups often reach a remarkable level of practical competence early. Not because they were naturally gifted, but because their entire environment was built for learning by doing, constantly, without interruption, for their whole waking lives. What ancient children lacked in formal instruction, they made up for in something modern education often struggles to replicate: total immersion, real stakes, deep observation, and a wide network of teachers who genuinely knew them. This isn't a claim that ancient life was easy, or that we should abandon schools. Obviously, the modern world requires knowledge no camp elder could have taught, but it is a reminder that human children are extraordinarily well built to learn from the world directly, not just from instruction, a capacity we sometimes underestimate simply because we've built so much structure around learning today. For most of human history, there was no line between raising a child and preparing them for life. The two were the same act, happening every single day, in every conversation, every task, every story told by firelight. No classrooms, no exams, no grades, no note home saying, talks too much during hunting. And yet, generation after generation, children grew up capable of doing something extraordinary, surviving, and then teaching the next generation to survive too. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that we should go back to raising children exactly this way, but that for hundreds of thousands of years, the most effective classroom humans ever built wasn't a room at all. It was simply life lived together. If you enjoyed this look into ancient human life, subscribe for more stories like this one. And let me know in the comments what you'd want to see next.